When you study criminal justice, especially over the last 20 years, there's been a bit of an unwritten rule, something that is often said and way more often implied to all the students that are in school that are trying to track crime and all of its various outcomes in our society. And that rule is as follows. We're never going back to the 1980s. We're never going back to the 1990s. No matter what we do for the most part in terms of policy, crime is going to continue on this downward trajectory. And even if it spikes up, it's never going to spike up to the record levels we saw in those generations. And that's because Americans are far more wealthy than they were in the 1990s. They're far more wealthy than they were in the 1980s. Not to mention the fact that we got the lead out of gasoline. Bill Clinton signed in the final nail in the coffin for leaded gasoline when he banned it from diesel trucks. So we're all good in the hood. We're not going to have people being poisoned by lead, and the crime drop is going to continue. And even if it slows down or reverses a little bit, it will never be as bad as the 1980s and the 1990s. Trust me. I mean, Freakonomics has that whole book about how, abortion, or the section in their book, and it's also in their film, how abortion was legalized and all those unwanted kids weren't born and they didn't grow up to become criminals. So maybe that's a part of the reason why crime is just not going to go up the way it was. And I have to be honest, while I was in school, I did actually believe this to be true. I did believe that the other factors that were leading to the crime spikes throughout the 80s and 90s were much stronger indicators, and the fact that those were going down meant that crime would not go up. However, I was given an absolute shock recently when I discovered that the city of Philadelphia has record high homicides, record high in the year 2021, and on pace for a new record in 2022. We're going to talk about this, but first we're going to have to go back to an older form of money and hedge against inflation with this sponsor transition, long-term sponsor of the channel, Noble Gold Investments. Over the years, you've probably tried a bunch of different investment vehicles, whether that be individual stocks or trying your hand at the crypto market. And here's the thing, we're seeing with this volatility, we're seeing with this inflation, that no matter what your mixture is, part of that should definitely be a hedge against inflation. This is why I've always believed in gold investing, and I recommend highly noblegoldinvestments.com, because if you go over to them, you can talk to a specialist. They will advise you on how best to hedge against inflation, and you can weather the oncoming storm. Plus, you get the financial freedom that goes with being hedged against inflation, and you can put it in an IRA so it's tax deferred. All these amazing things. Noble Gold Investments. Order a precious IRA right now. Call them at 877-646-5347. And this month, if you start a qualifying IRA, you will be gifted an American 3-ounce silver Virtue coin, which is absolutely beautiful to add to your collection. Call them today, weigh your options, hedge against inflation, noblegoldinvestments.com. So the way I discovered today's story is that I was actually watching a video over on Nuance Bro's channel. For those of you who are unaware, Nuance Bro is an up-and-coming channel, really small channel that just needs a little bit of support, a little bit of boost to get back into the game. And he recently did a video talking about the crime wave in Houston and explaining what was causing that. But in a throwaway line throughout the course of the video, he mentioned that the city of Philadelphia is experiencing record homicides in the year 2021, and again, they're on pace to either match or surpass that in 2022. And I was shocked by this. Again, the premise that the major crime wave was over and is not coming back is broken by this, and what's even more shocking is this all appears to be the fault of one man, and that man is Larry Krasner, the district attorney. Now, I'm going to recommend that Nuance Bro video in full because he's talking about the city of Houston, but we're going to focus primarily on Philadelphia, which was not covered super broadly in there, and talk about the numbers and how insane that city is. Now, the first thing that you need to know about the city of Philadelphia is that the reason they're having record spikes in homicides is not due to a growing population. In fact, the population peak in the city of Philadelphia was around the 1950s, and since then, they've lost over 500,000 residents in their city proper. So if you're planning on blaming the decrease or the increase in population, just know that there is in fact a decrease in population, and yet we're seeing record numbers. So the per capita numbers are actually even more outrageously record high than the numbers we've seen before, because Philadelphia is a city declining in population, not a city increasing in population. The second thing that you need to understand is that this is a problem that affects primarily black people in the city of Philadelphia. I know you're shocked by this, but hear me out. Let me quote you the numbers. Only 6% of the victims of homicides in the city of Philadelphia are white. 83% of the victims of homicides in the city of Philadelphia are in fact black. And as we all know, as we've all learned throughout our history, usually the perpetrator's race matches the race of the victims. And this holds true in Philadelphia for the suspects they catch when they actually catch them. Now, to give you the exact numbers on the clearance rate in the city of Philadelphia, we'll break it down by demographics. So white, as I said, represent 6% of the murder victims, but 63% of those homicide cases are actually closed. Black people, 82% of the victims, but only 33% of those cases are closed. So since the black numbers are significantly higher than the white numbers, this means the overwhelming majority of murders in the city of Philadelphia are not being closed. And this is a problem for a multitude of reasons. But the important question is, why is this happening? Why are homicides rising, and why is the clearance rate dropping? And to be clear, in its most simple, basic form, the clearance rate is dropping because the homicide rate is rising super fast. However, that does not necessarily mean that just because there's more murders, therefore we can't expect the cops to clear more than 33% of these murders. The cops are actually having a lot of trouble dealing with witnesses in these specific cases. And one of the reasons why they can't deal with witnesses in these specific cases is because Larry Krasner has essentially sent the message to everybody in the city of Philadelphia that if you testify against the criminals in your neighborhood, you are not safe, you will not be protected, and there's no guarantee that your testimony, even when it comes to a murder, will result in a long-term sentence or the heavy charge that murder should be associated with. They're not doing their job at the prosecution's office, and that is what is driving up the homicide rate in the city of Philadelphia. Now, there are individual cases that are absolutely heartbreaking where somebody does come forward. They're very brave in coming forward, and they ultimately ended up being murdered for doing so. This is because a lot of the shootings that go on in the city of Philadelphia are gang-related, and if you don't have the will to fight back against the gang violence and somebody actually steps up, eventually they're going to get targeted and taken out. So I don't really want to go into those individual anecdotes because I have far more interesting stories to talk about in relation to the city of Philadelphia. First and foremost, one of the things that Krasner has decided to not do anymore is prosecute people who commit crimes with guns seriously. Now, I know this is going to sound obvious to every one of my regular viewers because every one of my regular viewers probably has an IQ above room temperature, but typically not prosecuting people who commit crimes with guns will lead those people who commit crimes with guns to commit more crimes with guns. And Krasner has made it a matter of policy to not prosecute these cases. The year before Krasner took office, only 12 cases of people who were committing a crime while in the possession of a firearm were deferred to this non-prosecution, goofy criminal justice program that was meant to help these troubled people who are just dealing with the consequences of slavery. Krasner's first year, he upped that to 78. So you have 78 people who, by the way, again, already have shown a pattern of committing crimes with guns, not being prosecuted and given the enhancement that typically comes with committing a crime while in the possession of a firearm, but being diverted to a non-prosecutorial agency in the city of Philadelphia. Now, the reason Larry Krasner's office is doing this, the reason he's running the prosecution's office like this, is obvious. He's one of these Sean King, George Soros-backed district attorneys who was a public defender before he was a district attorney, who never had any interest in prosecuting crimes at all. In fact, Krasner was uniquely notorious in the city of Philadelphia because he had sued the police department of Philadelphia 75 times throughout his time as an attorney working against the criminal justice system. Now this guy has the power and he's implementing his agenda on the side of the prosecution, and it's resulting in horrible, dangerous precedents being set in Philadelphia. A perfect example of this is the rate that Krasner is dropping crimes that involve guns in the city of Philadelphia. Back in 2015, about 17% of these cases were dropped or dismissed due to the fact of lack of evidence, all these things that are standard whenever you're doing an arrest, or, you work out some kind of a deal. Maybe you divert because there are special circumstances, but again, it was just 17%. Now, that number is 65%. So if you get arrested for committing a crime, and during the course of committing that crime, you are possessing a firearm, there is a almost 2/3 chance that the charges will be dropped or dismissed by the district attorney. This has a huge impact because, again, if you're already bringing a firearm to your commission of multiple different crimes, the likelihood that you're ultimately going to end up shooting somebody with that firearm and killing them is exponentially higher. But Krasner is going out of his way to release 2/3 of these people back onto the streets without even so much as a plea bargain. And the plea bargaining thing is also staggering when you look at the numbers. 2015, there were 376 gun-related guilty pleas in the city of Philadelphia. This is pre-Krasner. In 2020, there were only 148, while gun crime is soaring. This is because people know that the consequences of carrying a firearm while you're committing a crime are being eroded, so they do it more often, thus leading to more gun crime, thus leading to more murders in the city of Philadelphia. And again, the correlation between Krasner's reign and the spike in gun violence and the spike in murders is something that is undeniable. Also, the correlation with his policies, undeniable. Just look at these charts about the rates of charges being dismissed related to guns, and you can see the spike in gun crime in the city of Philadelphia. Now, obviously, 2020 is a bit of an anomalous year because we had the whole COVID lockdown, so crime dropped in a lot of places before it spiked up post the George Floyd riots. But again, the trajectory is obvious. As gun crime is spiking, Krasner is doing a worse job and prosecuting less of these crimes, not more of them. And that's not to say that when he's prosecuting any of these crimes, he's doing it to the fullest extent of the law, because Krasner is your full-service, white-guilted wuss district attorney. This is what's going on in our country. This is what's going on in our nation. I want you to think about the 500-plus people, 83% of them who are black in the city of Philadelphia, who are being murdered at record numbers, and how this is just normalized in the city of Philadelphia. How the district attorney says he's fighting racism by letting an ever-increasing amount of black people die on his streets because, again, God forbid, we wouldn't deal with the systemic structural racism. I want you to think about this every time somebody brings up George Floyd. I want you to ask yourself the question, how many black lives are worth it because the video of Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd made you feel bad? Did we sacrifice enough people on the altar of fighting systemic structural racism at this point? Or do you want to talk about random white women arguing with black people, the greatest sin in the United States of America, and the videos that come out of that? You want to call people Karens? Or do you actually want to save people in your country, your fellow citizens that are dying on the streets of our cities that happen to be black? If you're going to have a movement called Black Lives Matter, is that about Patrisse Cullors having fancy parties with charitable donations? Or is it about actually, preventing the murder and killing of black people? Or does it just not matter when it's on the streets? It only matters when it's by a white cop specifically, and we can twist and edit out facts to make it seem like it's the worst thing ever. Those 9 cases a year of unarmed black people being killed by the police are the most important things. Let us not care about the hundreds in these cities to thousands nationwide of increased murders of black people in our country. 550 murders in the city of Philadelphia is now the new normal. One of our founding cities, where some of our great founding fathers come from, where the Liberty Bell is, where all these other things that are tied to Americana, and 550 people are being murdered in there. New York City has a population of 8.5 million. We've had our own crime spike, over 150 extra murders since the wokeness being implemented by Bill de Blasio, but we're still 100 murders shy of a city declining in population, and we're the largest city in this nation. What's going on in Philadelphia is a national embarrassment. It's a travesty. And if you care about black lives, if you care about intergenerational trauma, then why do you keep going all the way back to slavery, which none of these people remember and have no connection to? And why don't you talk about the ongoing trauma of losing your brother, your father, losing your friends multiple times a day? More than a black person is murdered every single day in the city of Philadelphia right now, and we're talking about the crimes from 400 years ago. Think about how insane that is. Think about how crazy that is. But that's the district attorney's philosophy. That's what Soros is paying for. That's what Sean King is campaigning for. And the saddest thing is, it doesn't have to be this way. It never had to be this way. It's one of the most basic concepts in criminal justice, in policing, that if somebody is committing robberies or other crimes while in the possession of firearms, you don't put that guy back on the streets and think nothing's gonna go wrong with that situation. You don't dismiss 65% of the charges in those cases because you're trying to fight institutional slavery in the very Confederate city of Philadelphia. Somebody gonna mention redlining in the comments? Is that the number one concern? Remember that story about the black dudes who were asked to leave a Starbucks and then the police came and they said, hey, we didn't want to arrest you, but please leave. And they said, no, you're going to have to arrest us. So they arrested them for trespassing. Is that the most important story in the city of Philadelphia? What Starbucks did with the bathroom policy and not letting them stay in the store? Or are we going to talk about the murders? Honestly, just thinking about what's going on here is depressing. And I'm a New Yorker, and I want to root against the city of Philadelphia, but I want to root against the city of Philadelphia because I want to root against the Philadelphia Phillies, the rivals to my New York Mets. I don't want to root against the people, my own citizens in that city. I want them to prosper. I want them to do well. I want them to be able to send their kids to school, I know, call me crazy, without them being murdered in gang violence. And when somebody does commit a crime, a serious crime, and they need to be removed from the streets, I want the district attorney to be more concerned with victims rather than equity and who's getting prosecuted for what crimes, even though these crimes are wildly, insanely disproportionate. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, you show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about Philadelphia's record homicides. Till next time.